So huge pleasure to invite John Collyns. John's, I think, recently retired as director of New Zealand Retirement Village Association that provides housing with care. Since 2012, doubled in size. Very timely in conversation. So last week we had the absolutely brilliant Dr. Beth Stratford thinking through solutions to the overall housing situation. And she saw older people's housing as kind of absolutely key to this. Um, we've got the long-term problem, John, in this country of people who might be owner occupiers in unsuitable accommodation and starting to think about other options. But we've also now got a what we call in a demographic time bomb, which is people getting older in the private rented sector, which although as a Labour government we're doing something to tighten that up and stop arbitrary evictions, is still going to be less secure than social housing and owner occupation. So we're just kind of really desperate to learn lessons from New Zealand, and we're assuming that loads of this happened under the last Labour government. So, John, do you just want to kick in and tell us what's been happening over there?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Andy. And thank you, Serena, for organising this. I was, up until about 2 months ago, the Executive Director of the New Zealand Retirement Villages Association, and had that role for some 17 years. So retirement villages as an affordable option for housing for older people has become for us a mainstream housing option. When I first started 17 years ago, it was a boutique, a little bit unusual. People didn't understand it very well. The business model was quite complex and quite counterintuitive for somebody who's actually owned property to then to basically get rid of it and get rid of the opportunities for capital gain and the rest of it. So you can understand the industry it's very much a boutique one. Today, it's, to give you a brief snapshot of New Zealand's population demographic, we're just over 5 million people when we're all home. And of that population, a sizable percentage is aging, as it is exactly as it is in Britain, Australia, and many other Western countries. So the retirement village industry basically has 4 promises. The first one is we will provide a warm, dry, age-appropriate house for an older person to live in. So that means there's no steps, there's no trip hazards. It's basically designed so that you can live in it at any stage, whether you're walking or in a wheelchair. So and it's warm and dry. Most New Zealand homes are a bit drafty, a bit cold, because the climate's not all that wonderful, really, despite our propaganda. It's not it's difficult for older people to live in. Basically, the high maintenance. There's a lot of issues around building, design, and construction, insurance risks, those sorts of things. We have a lot of earthquakes and floods here, which is another issue for householders. So that's the first one. The second one is that a village provides the residents with friends, activities, and a whole social opportunities, thereby combating the issue of social isolation, which is a very real health issue for older people. The third one, and probably the most important one for many people, is financial security. And I'll come back to that one because it's actually pretty important. And the fourth one is villages offer a pathway to care, should that be needed. Most retirement villages, like about 65% of them, have a care facility as part of a campus. So you can move in today, you can live independently for 8 to 10, 12, 15 years. And if you need care, then the care is sort of in another building in the same piece of land. So the whole thing is seamless, if you like. There's a high level of integration between independent living and care. So that, in essence, is the basic promise. We've got 14% of the over 75 population living in a retirement village. And retirement villages, while predominantly are in the main centres of population like Auckland, Tauranga, Hamilton at the top of the North Island, there are a large number in provincial New Zealand, in Nelson and Napier, and in smaller provincial towns as well. So they basically spread, I don't know how well you know New Zealand geography, but from the far north to deep south, there are retirement villages can be found. So that is a quick introduction of what the system is. Andy, do you want to sort of ask questions from there, or do you want me to witter on for a bit longer?
So, John, we'd really like to understand the economic model. Is this privately financed? So is it a private company that buys the land? If you can, yeah. So if you can talk us through the economics, but also kind of how the government
Absolutely.
treats this as well.
Okay, the government's involvement, apart from in the care process, is minimal. Obviously, we have zoning and consenting requirements, resource management stuff we have to get through, but that's true for any developer. So every retirement village, no, 90% of the retirement villages are privately owned, about 10% are not-for-profits, church groups, community trusts, people like that, but they all compete under the same piece of legislation, the Retirement Villages Act. So it doesn't matter whether you're a part of a listed company or whether you're a little not-for-profit church with half a dozen units out the back, you're all part of the same piece of legislation, which is very heavily focused on consumer protection. But as I said, apart from the provision of care where the government will subsidise residents who qualify in terms of assets, then there's the whole thing is funded by the residents. So in essence, the basics says this: the operator builds the village and sells the units to residents, and the residents sell their family home in the community. They use the capital sum they've got from that to purchase what's called an occupation right agreement in the village. And that's essentially a contract between me as the resident and you as the operator, which says, I have the right to live in this dwelling, I have the right to enjoy these amenities, the cafe, the bowling green, the swimming pool, the rest of it. And when I die or move into care, the operator will refurbish my unit, relicense it to the next person, and from that income, from the next resident, repay me my capital sum less a deferred management fee. The deferred management fee is usually about 20 to 30% of the original capital sum. So, and that deferred management fee is used to provide the community amenities, maintain the village, provide the insurance and the rates, and the staff in the village van, all that sort of stuff. And also the operator's return on their investment, because these things are hundreds of millions of dollars to build, and obviously the shareholders need to get a return on that. So the deferred management fee is part of that as well. The key thing about it is that when you move to a village, for the most part, you have a fixed weekly fee, which could be $150, for example, a week, and that covers all the maintenance, the outgoings, the rates, the insurance risks, all those sorts of things, so that the older person, the resident, knows to the last dollar how much they're going to pay when they move in. They know to the last dollar how much they're going to pay when they move out, how much they're going to get back. And they know to the last dollar how much they're going to pay when they're living in the village. And if the fee is fixed for life, as it is in around about 70% of villages, that's all you'll ever pay for the rest of your life. And if you can live in a village for 15 or 20 years, paying $150 a week, which is what about, I don't know, bit over £75, I suppose, then it's a very, very significant financial level of financial security for older people, and which is why, on one hand, you pay a capital sum, but you lose some of it, and that for many homeowners is counterintuitive. In New Zealand, many people buy property to say they can get capital gain on it when they sell it later on down the track. We have no capital gains tax in New Zealand, which means that this is quite a popular, should we say, way of saving for retirement. But on the other hand, if you own a home, all the risks of home ownership go with it: the maintenance, the insurance, the rates, the rest of it. And for many people, that getting rid of all that burden of home ownership is a huge relief. They move to a village, and their financial problems, theoretically at least, and practically for most people, are fixed. Does that help?
That helps no end. So the government don't help in terms of any tax incentives. It's all kind of self-financed.
The taxation arrangements for villages are a little complex, because they have capital sums coming in from every resident. They have the use of the money while the resident lives in the village, but when the resident dies or moves to care and their license, the unit is relicensed, they may well sell that for a higher amount than the first resident paid. So there's a capital gain in a sense to the operator, because ultimately that capital gain they've made between the two sales has to be repaid to the second resident from the money coming from the third, if you're following me. That's not treated as a capital gain and therefore is exempt from tax. But the deferred management fee is definitely income and that's taxed.
Okay, thanks. So in this country, a lot of the care homes, so this is kind of additional homes. This is additional care, but they're owned by really big multinational asset management companies, and
Mm.
that raises all kind of ethical questions. Who are the kind of typical owners of retirement villages in New Zealand? Is it specific companies, or has it kind of become a multinational business?
About half the units, and there's around about 46,000 units for 53,000 residents. About half that number are owned by listed companies or companies which are wholly owned by private equity firms. People like MetLife Care is wholly owned by a Swedish equity firm. Arvida is about to be purchased by an American equity firm, but the
Yeah,
rest,
yeah.
other three are listed on the stock exchange, so they're held by anybody basically. And there's Bupa, of course, and of course Bupa are major players in Britain. They're big
Yeah.
players here, and you know how they work. But the rest are owned by private companies, individuals, family groups, not for profits, as I said, and that's all. It's all part of the deal, I guess. So there's a wide range of organisations that own it. And the beauty of our legislation is that the business model can be quite flexible. They can range from rentals, not a lot, but there are rental villages, pure license to occupy, which is the model I've just described, a unit title where the resident buys the bricks and mortar and looks at and owns the bricks and mortar. And when they move out, they are responsible for refurbishing it. And then if there's any capital gain, they get to hold that capital gain, and the village will take a fixed fee from that. So there's a range of options. That last model where the resident gets a capital gain is quite popular because we like to get capital gain. I mean, that's what the owner home's for in New Zealand, sadly, is the capital gain. But on but on the other hand, they have to maintain it, and that's a very long piece of string, as I've just described. So, sorry, your question was about aged care.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yes, yeah, yeah.
and as part of that, yes, most of the aged care operators are large listed companies. There are small privately owned rest homes all over the country. They are complex and difficult to maintain because the funding from the government, the subsidy provided to residents who qualify, is just not enough. And I
Yeah,
guess that's probably a universal
as it
truth.
is here. Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
So this is a model that works for people who are owner occupiers. Do the state ever pay for people who haven't got equity, or is it exclusively owner occupiers who move into retirement villages?
Yeah, there is the capital sum, the initial capital sum, which is usually gained from selling the home, is an important part of it. But I
Yeah,
did say that there are rental villages. They tend to be quite down market and quite modest, but they do exist. And if there is a rental and the resident's income is insufficient, then the government has what's called an accommodation supplement, which they will pay to make up. Technically, theoretically that's available in a village as well for meeting the cost of the outgoings, the regular outgoings. And if you're in a village which doesn't have a fixed weekly fee, then those outgoings can fluctuate quite a bit. And technically, you are eligible for some relief from the state for that. But by and large, it doesn't really happen. By and large, the capital sum is what governs it. But herein lies the beauty of the model. So an operator might advertise a unit for, say, $750,000 with a 20% deferred management fee, but you might not actually have $750,000. You might only have $500,000 because you've lost money on the stock exchange and all that stuff. You know, in unwise investments. We had a thing about that about 12 years ago. So you might go to the operator and say, look, I've only got $500,000. How can I bridge the gap of that extra $250,000? The operator can say, well, I'll tell you what, you can have a higher deferred management fee. Instead of paying 20%, you'll pay 30%, and that we can use to make up the difference. So you say, yep, that's fine with me. I don't care. I don't see the money because I'll be dead when it's necessary. And then it comes off the capital sum, which is going to be repaid at the end. So you might only get, instead of getting $500,000 back, you might only get $400,000 back, for argument's sake. So the model is flexible, so it can accommodate people who don't have as much money as they would like. And of course, villages are themselves incredibly variable in price as well. They can range from, $300,000 to $3 million. And the operator fixed the price depending on the amenities and the area where the village is and what the residents expect.
Okay, so that's finished my questions, John. That's a really comprehensive explanation of the financial model. You ran through the numbers very quickly. Can I just ask you to walk us through those more slowly? So, how many New Zealanders are in retirement villages now?
We've got around about 480 registered retirement villages. To be a registered retirement village, you have to meet the definition in the Retirement Villages Act. You register with a registrar of retirement villages, and that means a memorial is placed on the title of the land, which means that this bit of land can only ever be operated as a retirement village. And every subsequent owner has to respect all the contracts the residents have. They can improve them, but they can't make them worse. So we've got 480 villages, got 45,000 units. Sorry, I forget exactly the number. And around about 53,000 residents. They cover all sorts of ages, all sorts of levels of income, and our national super is reasonably generous. So people can live in a village and live off their national super and not have to and be perfectly comfortable. So it's as I said, they're all over the country. Wherever councils will actually quite actively promote retirement villages by giving concessional rates or concessions around the consenting regime. So there's because they know that older people need the promised villages offer, the warm, dry housing, the financial security, the social environment, all that stuff. So councils know that and will actively support villages often, not always, but often.
So we've got a friend in a retirement village in Takofi, Hamilton, who just loves it. So I've seen it in operation. Okay, if I can just throw it open, any questions from people on the call? I don't see any coming up. Let me just.
No, Sheila's got one.
Oh yeah, sorry, you can see more than me. Jump in, Sheila.
Yeah, I can't put my hand up. I'm the host. I wondered, are all the villages only for older people, or any of them mixed? And at what age do people start being eligible if it is only for older people?
That's a good question, Sheila. There is a minimum age for almost all villages, and it will be around about 30, about a third of them have a minimum age of 65, which is our retirement age, technically in New Zealand. Another third has 70 years as a minimum age. And the third is roughly divided between 55 plus or 75 plus. And the 75 plus as the minimum age are often villages with a care facility, and they often have an older population, whereas a brand new village will have a much younger population and a younger average age. I know a village in Nelson, where I live, the average age is 76 and a half, for example, but it dates back from the days when councils allowed what they called old people's housing to be developed. This is right at the beginning of retirement villages. And for them, an old person started at 55. Of course, we've all moved on from there.
Okay, and any other questions? Can't see any.
Could I just ask, do you have any sort of data on resident satisfaction, and especially in comparison, I suppose, to their previous situation or to the previous status quo?
Yeah, we do, Joss. In fact, we've done the RBA business has done a lot of random surveys. We did 2 in 2021 because we thought we were doing God's work, and we were somewhat surprised to find that the wider population didn't quite agree with us. They thought the business model was an outrage and the loss of capital gain was just appalling and bloody blah. So we did 2 surveys of residents randomly chosen across 105 villages, and the level of satisfaction was incredibly high. Because I was a lobbyist, I round these things up. So to say to ministers, look, we're looking at a 96% satisfaction rate, which is 86 people who either very satisfied or satisfied, plus 10% who are neutral. So we had basically 4% who were dissatisfied. I suspect that those people would be dissatisfied wherever they live, whether they live in a village or not. But we were very proud of that. And operators will do their own Net Promoter Score surveys, and they will be distressed if they get less than 90. You know, it is an industry where the residents are incredibly happy. Having said all that, the legislation is 20 years old now. It's being reviewed, and our Residents Association has quite strong views on aspects of the business model, which we needn't go into now unless you really want to. But it is something which the Retirement Villages Association acknowledges there are some issues around the business model, and are happy to talk to the Residents Association to make some voluntary changes.
Thanks,
I think
John.
Chris has got his hand up.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Yeah.
this, John. My question is about the care facilities in the housing complex. How would you say they are, and how is the cost? And that's because in the UK, care facilities is a big issue, especially for social care and the elderly. Thank you.
Yeah, the care facilities basically, there are 3 broad options for care. The first one is that if your assets are below $280,000, that's an incredibly generous amount, but it's one of the most generous in the world. But if your assets are below $280,000, the state will pay for your care. If your assets are above $280,000, you pay for your care until the assets are eroded below that threshold, then the state picks up the care. But you might not like a 15 square metre care room with a shared bathroom, so you might want to pay a capital sum and get a nicer room. You might want to pay, I don't know, $250,000 and get a 50 square metre room with your own ensuite and a nice outlook and nicer amenities, and that's another option. Or you might not have that capital sum, but you're prepared to pay an extra $100 a day, $700 a week for what's called a premium charge, a premium room. So the short answer is that if you don't have a lot of money, there's options for you. If you do have a lot of money and you want your care to be delivered in nicer surroundings, then there's some choices there as well.
Thank you.
But like this country, it sounds incredibly expensive, John.
Sorry, what is?
So yeah, the care packages sound incredibly expensive, like this country.
Yeah,
I don't know if there's any country that's cracked this, but we certainly haven't over here.
Yeah, no, our care is expensive. And the figure of about 60,000 a year has been tossed around, depending on the level of care. And of course, you have rest home level care, which is slowly fading out because our government wants to have care delivered to them, to residents in their own homes. So the low level of care is supported by external providers. That's the first level. The rest, the hospital level care is really for people who are really very sick.
Yeah.
And your life expectancy is measured in months rather than years in hospital level care. You have psychogeriatric, which is not many facilities offer that, and there's dementia care in varying levels as well. So if you're fortunate, your care facility is a continuum of care, you will have rest home, hospital, and probably dementia in your village as part of the overall package.
Okay, thanks, John. Any other questions? No, in which
Sheila.
case, oh, so
Sheila's got
Sheila's
her hand
back. Jump in, Sheila.
Yes, I was going to ask if people could have care delivered to them in their own dwelling rather than having to move to a care facility, but you've answered that question.
Mm.
And partly the reason I was thinking about that was that we have this part of the housing sector is not my area, but I know that we have a range of sheltered housing with extra care, and then we have retirement villages as well and extra care villages. My understanding is that sheltered housing where there is extra care can be very, very difficult to sell. So it's not, in some places at least, it's not very popular. And I don't really understand why that would be the case when what you're talking about is a model that's clearly very popular, if I've understood it correctly. So it is in demand, great demand. Are there long waiting lists?
There are some villages. Some villages count their waiting lists in years. Parkwood Village, which is a community trust in Waikanae, just north of Wellington, I think, has at least an 8-year waiting list. So if you don't sign on when you're 65, you could well miss out altogether. Others, brand new villages, are happy to take anybody who's got the money, basically. So where a village has got a good reputation, is well established, have got a good care facility, and people can see the transition is essentially seamless, they have serious waiting lists. But, you know, the property market is also part of this. Right now, we're in a property market decline. So people are waiting longer for the market to recover so they can get what they think their house is worth. But your very first point, Sheila, about care being delivered to residents in their own homes, traditionally that's been done by external care deliverers rather than the village itself. This is one of the areas where we've not been successful in our lobbying, unfortunately, is to persuade the health ministry to let retirement village operators deliver care to their own residents in their own homes. Don't ask why. It's just too obscure for me to understand. But if you are assessed as needing care in your own home in the village, that care will be available to you free of charge by the local health board, which looks after these things.
Thank you.
Can I just check if there's any other questions?
Can't see anyone.
No. Oh, yeah, sorry, Janet.
Yeah, like any village, I think there would be the occasional person who didn't get on with everybody for whatever reason, the neighbour from hell or whatever. What happens in that situation?
Well, remember though, they're under a contract, and the contract, the Occupational Right Agreement it's called, and the Occupational Right Agreement, or ORA, will specify why they can't be evicted unless they basically can't live independently any longer, i.e. they need care or are demented. That if you mistreat, or if you fail to treat other residents courteously and politely in the way that you would want to be treated yourself, there are some options for you to be evicted, but it's very, very difficult to actually do that, as you would expect, because as everyone ages, there's levels of dementia creep in and people's behavior changes. So it's a matter of being able to manage that changes of behavior. But having said that, there are people who are, not to put too fine a point on it, basically assholes, and the operator will often just buy them out, basically, pay them back the money they moved in, and encourage them to go somewhere else. It happens maybe a dozen times a year, possibly, out of 53,000 people. So it is rare, but it does happen. Rosalind, I think, has a hand up.
I have a question about relationships between with the model you described is mostly owner-occupied basis. So basically, you get in because you've got property to start off with, as I understand it, and you've also got some rental options, as I understand it.
Correct. Yes.
But you describe those as being somewhat more basic. And I'm wondering two things, really. I'm wondering if if rental and owner occupy ever mix, whether you get places where you have some rental and some owner occupy base people, and how that relationship works out, because sometimes that can create some sort of tension.
It can do. There's a village which is run by the Masons in Wainuiamata, which is a suburb of Wellington. This brand new village, and they have a missional approach to providing rentals for people in need. So this particular village, which is brand new, has, I think, 8 or 10% of their units are rentals. And as you can imagine, it's very, very popular. The balance are residents who have gone in under license to occupy, so they've paid their capital sum. They don't actually own it. So it's important to remember that you only have the contracted right to live in the village. You don't own anything other than the sofa and the widescreen TV. The operator owns everything else and is responsible for maintenance and upkeep, I might say. Because the Masons and Presbyterians and others have a missional approach to their way they run villages, they will cross-subsidize the rentals from the profits made from the village itself. So it's a very virtuous circle, if you like. And other operators who are commercial may have rentals on a short-term basis because the unit's empty and there's people who need it. But residents will be under the Residential Tenancies Act, which means that they can be evicted at 90 days notice and stuff like that. But those are less common. But the ones under rentals, which are part of a retirement village, they will often have the same protections that the ordinary residents in the village have around evictions and the rest of it.
Thank you.
John, do you find that the retirement villages are quite racially segregated, or are they more mixed than that?
They are quite homogeneous, and I was asked a question quite recently by Porirua City. Porirua City is a suburb of Wellington where there's a very high Maori and Pacifica population. I said the villages are quite homogeneous, but having said that, we are finding that there's quite a growing Maori population, I'm happy to say, are moving to villages. Traditionally, of course, they didn't necessarily have the capital sum to be able to move in, but that's changing. And here in Auckland, where I'm at present, this hideous wallpaper behind me is the Pullman Hotel, rather than my own personal taste. Here in Auckland, there are villages which have got quite a good Chinese or Indian population, a growing Chinese and Indian population as well. And of course, they will modify their village to cater for different cultural expectations. But having said all that, I would imagine that 90% plus are people who look like me.
Yeah. Okay, Sheila, another question. Yeah.
I have been involved, though I'm not now, in the development of an idea of a retirement village in this area. I live on Tyneside, in England, and this was a particular scheme which I hope will eventually come into being for people who were retired artists in creatives in the widest sense. And I wondered if you had any schemes or knew of any schemes in your country that are for artists, for the creative sector, or are there any other of your villages that cater for a particular interest?
That's an incredibly good question, Sheila. It's one of the things which I've been asked over the years about people who want to establish a village for a particular group of interest. And you'll probably be aware of the movie called Quartet, which is a village which is established, a fictional one, obviously, for musicians. We don't have the population really to be able to do that quite as segmented as that. But having said that, there's a village here in Auckland called the Dutch Village, which has 80% of its residents are of Dutch or Dutch extraction. New Zealand, you understand, is a very popular destination for Dutch people. Our Abel Tasman discovered it first of all, and they quite like the idea of moving out here. So there's a village for Dutch people. There are Maori iwi, which is the tribe, the local tribe, owns land, and they will often establish a village as a joint partnership with a developer, and they will often have a role in running the village. The staff will be drawn from that particular iwi. There will be other special considerations. There will be a lot of culture, Maori culture will be involved. Another one here in Auckland, in a very, very snooty part of town, is wholly owned by one of the iwi here in Auckland. And that, of course, is the iwi culture is reflected in the village, but the population is not large enough for one devoted to any particular group or interest. Every village will have artists and creative people in it, but what will happen is they will form their own group within a village and a support community, and they will work with each other as part of the village, rather than have a village devoted to them entirely.
John, that's been absolutely fascinating. In fact, thanks for getting up early in the morning. In fact, thanks for rushing around to sort out your internet connection. And you can tell all your friends and family you'll shortly be appearing on Spotify, because we put all of our podcasts on Spotify.
Lovely. Well, that'd be great.
So huge thanks, and yeah, thanks again to Serena for setting this up. Okay, take care, John.